One day does not define you. The best day of your life doesn't make you invincible, and the worst day of your life doesn't make you a failure. But you don't believe that right now, because you fell. After all the work you put in, after all the lessons, after the bricks you laid with so much discipline, you fell. And now you're on the ground convinced that one day erased everything. It didn't. But what you do in the next few hours is going to determine whether what you built survives or collapses. I know what happened. You don't need to tell me, because it happens to everyone who reaches this point on the road. You started building your purpose in the last episode. You stopped looking for signs from the sky and got to work. You designed your daily discipline practice. You identified your weekly act of service. You implemented your nightly improvement review. You started laying bricks with the consistency of someone who finally understands that purpose isn't found but built. And for a few days, maybe a week, maybe two, it worked. You felt different. You felt direction. You felt, for the first time in a long time, like someone who's moving towards something worth building. And then the bad day came. The day you broke your streak. The day you didn't get up early. The day you didn't do your discipline practice. The day you weren't useful to anyone but sank into the couch consuming garbage content for hours. The day you ate what you shouldn't have eaten. The day you said what you shouldn't have said. The day your old self, the one you buried in episode 5, came back with a force you didn't anticipate and took control as if the last 10 episodes of work had never existed. That day devastated you, not because of what actually happened, which was probably something minor if you look at it objectively, but because of what it meant in your mind. Because of the catastrophic narrative your mind built around an event that didn't deserve that much power. In your mind, that day meant you're worthless, that you can't change, that all the work you did over 10 episodes was a pretty illusion that vanished at the first contact with reality, that the new person you were building with so much care and intention is a fraud that can't withstand the most basic test, that the purpose you started building is too much for you, too high, too demanding for someone with your weaknesses, that you're not strong enough, not disciplined enough, not good enough, not capable enough to maintain what you started with so much hope just a few weeks ago. And worst of all, somewhere in your mind, a voice appeared that said, "See, I knew you couldn't do it. Better go back to the way things were." At least that was comfortable. That voice is your old self trying to regain control. That voice is the identity you buried in episode 5, pushing the coffin lid open from the inside. And if you listen to it, if you let one bad day become permission to abandon everything you've built, that voice wins. Not because it was right, because you gave it the power. One bad day, 24 hours of failure, and in your mind it already destroyed weeks of construction, already invalidated every brick you laid, already erased every advance you made, already eliminated every moment of clarity, of discipline, of real progress you lived before that day. But it didn't destroy anything. Listen to me carefully. It destroyed absolutely nothing. What you built during weeks of consistent work doesn't collapse because of one day of failure. That's not how construction works. A house doesn't fall because one brick comes loose. A river doesn't stop flowing because a rock blocks it for a moment. A muscle doesn't lose all its strength because you skipped one day of training. Your progress, your real growth, your transformation over 10 episodes doesn't get erased because you had a day where the old you showed up strong and won a 24-hour battle in a war that's been going on for months, and that you are winning. What does destroy months of work, what does have the power to bring the entire construction down, is not the bad day itself, it's what you do after the bad day. And that's exactly what we need to work on today. Because the difference between people who build something significant with their lives and people who start and quit is not that the first group never has bad days. It's that the first group knows what to do when the bad day arrives. They know how to get up. They know how not to turn a stumble into a permanent fall. They know how to protect momentum even when everything seems to have ground to a halt. The Stoics faced bad days that would make yours look like minor inconveniences by comparison, not to minimize your pain, to show you that if they could keep building after what they faced, you can get up after what you faced. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire during one of the worst plagues in ancient history, the Antonine Plague, which killed millions of people, including possibly members of his own family. He lost most of his children, several in infancy, a pain that has no name in any language, because human language doesn't have enough words to name that kind of devastation. He faced endless wars on the empire's borders that he hadn't sought and couldn't end. He was betrayed by people close to him in whom he'd placed genuine trust. And every morning, without a single documented exception across years of records, he got back up, opened his journal, and wrote in his meditations again, sat on the throne and made decisions affecting millions of people again, tried again, with every ounce of strength he had left, to be better than the day before, not because he was superhuman or because the pain didn't affect him. Because he understood something you need to learn today that can save you, that the bad day is an inevitable part of the process of building something significant. It's not the end of the process, it's part of it. Seneca was exiled to Corsica for 8 years. 8 years, not 8 days, not 8 weeks. 8 years ripped from his life, his position, his fortune, from everything he'd built over decades of work and sacrifice. He lost his position of power. He lost his accumulated wealth. He lost access to everything he'd built, and that defined his social identity. He was sent to a remote, hostile island, cut off from the world he knew, with the bare minimum to survive and no guarantee the exile would ever end. That's not a bad day. That's an existential earthquake that destroys the foundations of everything you thought you were. And Seneca kept writing. On that island, with that pain, with that loss, with that brutal uncertainty about whether he'd ever return to the life he knew, he kept reflecting, kept producing, kept building purpose with what he had available in a place that should have been the definitive end of everything he was. Because he understood, with the clarity of someone who has hit rock bottom and discovered the bottom has a floor, that giving up was the only real defeat. That as long as he kept laying bricks, no matter how precarious they were, no matter how small they were, nothing was truly lost. That the exact moment he stopped building, stopped trying, sat down to wait for death or rescue with empty hands, that's when everything would truly be over. Epictetus walked his entire adult life with a leg destroyed by the abuse of his former master. Every step he took was a physical reminder of what had been done to him, of the injustice he'd suffered, of the pain he carried. And every step was also a declaration that the damage received didn't determine the direction chosen. That he could walk with a broken leg toward a purpose built with the same determination as someone with 2 healthy legs. That the obstacle wasn't the end of the road, it was the road. Welcome to episode 11 of From Lost to Unstoppable. This is Stoicism for Winners. And this is the episode where you learn that falling doesn't define you. What defines you is what you do on the ground. Whether you stay there feeling sorry for yourself, or whether you get up, dust yourself off, and lay the next brick as if the fall never happened. Not because it didn't happen, because it doesn't have the power to stop you unless you give it that power. If this episode helps you get up from a fall, drop this in the comments. One day does not define me. Today you're going to learn that momentum isn't lost by falling, it's lost by staying on the ground. And that the hardest person to defeat isn't the one who never falls, but the one who always gets back up. First Stoic lesson: a bad day doesn't destroy months of work. What destroys months of work is turning a bad day into a bad week, and then into total abandonment. You need to understand the mechanics of how progress gets destroyed, because if you don't understand them, you're going to keep falling victim to them over and over. Every time you stumble, every time you fail, every time your construction gets a crack. Progress doesn't get destroyed all at once. It doesn't get destroyed by a catastrophic event or a spectacular failure. It gets destroyed slowly, progressively, through an escalation process that starts small and ends in total abandonment. And that process always follows the same pattern. Always, without exception. I've seen it repeat thousands of times, and it works exactly the same way every time. Step 1. The bad day. A day where you don't follow through on your practice. A day where you fall into an old habit. A day where you break the streak you'd built with so much effort. One day. Just one. And by itself, that day doesn't have the power to destroy anything. It's one loose brick in a wall of 100 bricks. The wall is still standing. The structure is intact. The damage is minimal and completely repairable. Step 2. The catastrophic interpretation. This is where the real destruction begins. Not in the bad day, but in how you interpret it. Your mind takes that day, that single day of failure, and turns it into evidence of a pattern. See, it's always the same. I knew I couldn't do it. This proves I don't have what it takes. Your mind generalizes a specific event and turns it into a universal truth about who you are. One day of failure becomes a life sentence. I'm someone who can't stick with anything. Step 3. The second bad day. This is the decisive day. Because after the catastrophic interpretation, your mind has already decided you're failing, that you can't, that there's no point in trying. And from that belief, the second bad day becomes inevitable. Not because it's actually inevitable, because your mind has turned it into a self-fulfilling prophecy. I already failed yesterday, what's one more day? I already broke the streak, why bother? It's all ruined anyway, I can take a break. And that second day of failure, which should have been a recovery day, becomes confirmation of the catastrophic interpretation from step 2. See? 2 days in a row. It's over. Step 4. The bad week. 1 day becomes 2. 2 becomes 3. 3 becomes 4. 4 becomes an entire week where you don't lay a single brick, where you don't do your practice, where you don't review your progress, where you don't think about your purpose. And with each passing day without building, something insidious happens. The emotional cost of starting again grows exponentially, because now you don't just have to resume the practice you dropped, you have to face the shame of having dropped it. You have to admit to yourself and to the mirror from episode 4 that still confronts you, that you fell, that you stumbled, that you couldn't maintain what you promised to maintain. You have to go through the discomfort of starting again, something you'd already started before, that you'd already announced as a real change, and that you couldn't sustain. And that shame, that growing emotional weight that accumulates with every day of inaction, that feeling that coming back requires more courage than you had to start the first time, is exactly what produces the final and most destructive step of the entire process. Step 5. The silent abandonment. This is the real killer of purposes, of projects, of transformations, of entire lives. And it's silent. That's its power. You stop trying. Not with a dramatic declaration where you say, I quit everything. Not with a visible breaking point where you admit you can't go on. With a gradual silence, you simply stop doing. You stop laying bricks without announcing that you stopped laying them. You stop reviewing your progress without admitting that you stopped reviewing it. You stop thinking about your purpose without acknowledging that you stopped thinking about it. You go back to the passive waiting mode you knew so well before this series, the mode that was comfortable in its mediocrity and familiar in its lack of direction. And you don't even admit it. You don't even have the honesty to acknowledge that you quit. You tell your mind, with the same talent for lying to yourself that we confronted in episode 2, "I'm just taking a break," or "I'll pick it back up next week when I have more energy," or "I need to find the motivation first so I can come back strong." But next week becomes next month, and next month becomes next year, and next year becomes never. And everything you built with so much effort and so much intention sits there abandoned like a half-finished building that the weeds start covering, while nobody dares admit the construction stopped. That's the process. 5 steps. And it always starts, without exception, in the same place. A bad day interpreted as evidence of total failure, not in the bad day itself, in the interpretation. Marcus Aurelius faced bad days constantly. Not bad days like yours where you didn't go to the gym or ate something you shouldn't have. Bad days where the decisions he made as emperor turned out to be wrong and the consequences affected thousands of people. Days where people he trusted deeply disappointed and betrayed him. Days where the war was going badly and the news from the front brought death, defeat, and devastation. Days where the plague killed more people and there was nothing he could do to stop it. And never, in the entire extensive and honest record of his meditations, across thousands of lines written during years of constant adversity, did he interpret a bad day as evidence of total failure. He never generalized. He never said, "This proves I'm a bad emperor," or "This proves I should never have accepted this responsibility." He interpreted it as what it was, and nothing more. A day. A hard day in a long life, full of hard days and good days. A brick that wasn't laid well in a wall that was still standing and that would keep being built tomorrow. Not a collapse of the entire construction. Seneca taught that the human mind has a deeply destructive and irrational tendency to generalize the specific. To take a particular event, limited, confined to one moment and one place, and turn it into a universal law about who you are and what you can expect from the future. "I failed today" becomes "I always fail." "I couldn't today" becomes "I can never." "I gave in to temptation today" becomes "I'm a weak person." That generalization is the poison that turns a stumble into a permanent fall. And the antidote is simple. Keep the event at its actual scale. I failed today, just today. Tomorrow is a new day, and tomorrow I choose differently. Epictetus put it with the bluntness that defined him. You failed today? Fine. What are you going to do tomorrow? If tomorrow you repeat the failure, you have a problem. If tomorrow you get up and try again, today was just a stumble on a long road. And stumbles on a long road are as inevitable as rocks on a mountain trail. They don't mean the trail is wrong. They mean you're walking. Your assignment for this lesson is to create a bad day protocol, a plan you've already decided on before the bad day arrives, so that when it comes, and it will come, you don't have to make decisions in the middle of the emotional storm. The protocol has 3 simple but non-negotiable steps. First, acknowledge the bad day without generalizing it. Say it out loud if you need to. Today, I had a bad day. Just today. This day says absolutely nothing about tomorrow, or about who I am, or about what I'm capable of building. Second, lay one minimum brick. Don't try to recover everything you lost in one day. Just lay one brick. a small one. Something that reminds you that you're still building, even though today the building was minimal. It could be your 3-question nightly review. It could be 5 minutes of your practice instead of the full hour. Whatever it is, but something. Third, sleep and start fresh tomorrow, as if the bad day never existed. Not from guilt, not from shame. From the same intention you started with the first time. Clean, fresh, with the awareness that one badly placed brick doesn't bring down a house that has 100 well-placed bricks. Second Stoic lesson. Stumbling is part of the road. Staying on the ground, feeling sorry for yourself, is a choice you make every minute you don't get up. I need you to understand something about stumbling that's going to completely change your relationship with failure. Stumbling is not optional, it's mandatory. It's a structural part of the process of building anything significant. It's not a sign that something's wrong, it's a sign that you're walking, because the only people who never stumble are the ones who never move. The ones sitting in the same spot they've always been, comfortable in their immobility, safe in their mediocrity, protected from stumbling by the simple decision to never take a single step. You left that immobility 10 episodes ago. You started moving, started walking, started building, and when you walk, you stumble. Not if you walk, when you walk. The stumble isn't a miscalculation or a sign of incompetence or evidence that you chose the wrong path. It's the natural and inevitable consequence of being in motion. And the only relevant question when you stumble isn't why you stumbled, but how long you're going to stay on the ground. Because staying on the ground is a choice. Every minute you spend after a stumble, feeling sorry for yourself, analyzing what went wrong, punishing yourself for falling, feeding the narrative that you can't do it. Every single one of those minutes is an active choice to remain on the ground. It's not something that happens to you, it's something you decide. And it's a decision you renew with every minute you don't get up. Culture taught you that after a stumble, you need a long, elaborate process before you can move again. You need to analyze the root causes of what went wrong. You need to understand what failed and why it failed, and how to prevent it from failing again. You need to process your emotions with patience and compassion. You need to forgive yourself, which is the self-help industry's favorite word for what's actually giving yourself permission to stay on the ground without feeling guilty about it. You need to find the motivation to try again, as if motivation were an object you lose and have to dig around for between the couch cushions. You need a revised plan, improved, stumble-proof, that guarantees this time it'll work. You need certainty that it won't happen again before exposing yourself to the risk of it happening again. That whole process sounds reasonable, sounds mature and reflective, sounds like what a responsible, emotionally intelligent adult would do. And it's the perfect trap, absolutely perfect, for staying on the ground indefinitely without feeling like you're choosing to stay. Because you're not on the ground, you're processing, you're not paralyzed, you're reflecting, you're not avoiding, you're preparing to come back stronger. The mind is brilliant at finding noble names for inaction. But while you analyze, you don't act. While you process with all the patience in the world, you don't build a single brick. While you search for motivation in books and podcasts and therapeutic conversations, the days pass and the construction site sits idle. While you revise the plan for the 4th time, looking for the perfect error-free version, the actual construction is exactly where you left it the day you fell. And the longer you spend on the ground, processing, analyzing, preparing for a glorious comeback that never arrives, the harder the simple act of getting up becomes. Not because the stumble was severe enough to immobilize you, because time on the ground creates its own gravity, a downward inertia that keeps you there with a force that grows with every passing day. The ground becomes comfortable, familiar, predictable, safe in its horizontality. And getting up requires overcoming not just the inertia from the original stumble, which would have dissipated if you'd gotten up the next day, but the massive accumulated inertia of every day you spent processing instead of acting. Marcus Aurelius didn't have the luxury of staying on the ground processing after a bad day, not because he didn't feel the blow, because the empire didn't stop while he processed his emotions. The problems didn't wait for him to find motivation. People didn't stop needing him because he had a bad day. And that external urgency that forced him to get up immediately after every blow was, paradoxically, one of the greatest blessings of his position, because it didn't let him stay on the ground long enough for the ground to become comfortable. You don't have that external urgency. Nobody's forcing you to get up. Nobody depends on you getting up tomorrow. You can stay on the ground processing for weeks and the world doesn't fall apart. And that lack of external urgency is your greatest enemy after a stumble, because it gives you permission to stay down. Gives you the luxury of analyzing, reflecting, waiting, procrastinating, searching for motivation, and doing everything your mind needs to justify not having gotten up yet. You need to create your own urgency, not a fake urgency invented to manipulate you, a real urgency based on a truth you already know. Every day you spend on the ground is a day you hand to your old self. It's a day where the person you buried in episode 5 gains ground. It's a day where the bricks you laid with so much effort start loosening because nobody applied fresh cement. The cost of staying on the ground isn't zero, it's high, it's growing, and every day that passes without getting up, the cost goes up. Seneca knew this from direct experience. In exile, the temptation to stay on the ground was immense. The temptation to feel sorry for himself, to process endlessly the injustice of what had happened to him, to analyze what he could have done differently to avoid it, to search for someone to blame and feed the resentment. All of that was comfortable ground, where he could have stayed for 8 years until the exile ended. But he chose to get up, not once, every day. Every morning in Corsica was a choice not to stay on the ground, not to give the fall the power to define the rest of his time. To keep building even though what he built on that island seemed insignificant compared to what he'd built before in Rome. Epictetus taught that the time you spend on the ground after a stumble is inversely proportional to your inner freedom. A truly free person gets up fast, not because the stumble doesn't hurt, because they understand that every minute on the ground is a minute they surrender to something that has no right to determine their direction, the immediate past. What happened yesterday has no right to decide what you do today. What went wrong last week has no authority over what you build this week. And staying on the ground processing is giving what already happened a power over your present that it doesn't deserve and only has if you choose to grant it. There's an image I want you to carry with you from now on. Think of a boxer who takes a punch and hits the canvas. The referee starts counting. 1, 2, 3. Every second the boxer stays on the canvas, the count advances, and if it reaches 10, it's over. Not because the punch destroyed him, because he stayed on the ground too long. Your life works the same way. There's no visible referee counting, but the count advances with every day you spend on the ground after a stumble. And if you stay too long, if you let the count reach the silent abandonment, it's over. Not because the stumble destroyed you, because you spent too long deciding whether it was worth getting up. The answer is always yes. It's always worth getting up. No matter how bad the stumble was, no matter how many bricks fell, no matter how far you feel from where you were before the fall. Getting up is always the right answer. The analysis can come later while you walk. The reflection can happen in motion. The processing can be done with hands full of new bricks, instead of empty and trembling on the ground. Your assignment for this lesson is to commit to a non-negotiable rule, the 24-hour rule. After any stumble, after any bad day, you have a maximum of 24 hours to get up and lay at least one brick. Not a complete reconstruction, one brick, just one. Whatever reminds you that you're still on the path. And those 24 hours aren't for analyzing or processing or searching for motivation. They're for resting, sleeping, and starting fresh the next day with the simplicity of a bricklayer who shows up at the site knowing he has to lay one more brick today, regardless of what happened at the site yesterday. Third Stoic lesson. Marcus Aurelius faced wars, betrayals, plagues, and the death of his children, and every morning he went back to writing, governing, and trying to be better than the day before. I need you to understand the magnitude of what Marcus Aurelius faced, so you stop using your stumbles as an excuse to quit. Because what he lived through makes your bad days look like exactly what they are. Minor inconveniences your mind has inflated into existential tragedies that justify abandonment. Marcus Aurelius ruled Rome for 19 years. 19 years. And during those 19 years, there was practically not a single period of sustained peace or stability. His reign was an endless chain of overlapping crises, each one enough to destroy a normal person, all happening simultaneously as if fate had decided to concentrate the adversity of 10 lifetimes into one. The Antonine Plague, a pandemic that spread across the entire empire and killed millions of people over years. Not weeks, not months, years of constant death. Years of watching his people die without being able to do anything effective to stop it. Years of making decisions about scarce resources, knowing that any decision meant someone wouldn't receive help. Imagine the weight of that. Imagine waking up every morning knowing the plague is still there, that people are still dying, that your best efforts aren't enough, and that you still have to keep governing, keep deciding, keep functioning as if you were capable of handling something that clearly exceeds the capacity of any human being. The wars on the borders, the Parthians in the east, the Germanic tribes in the north, conflicts he hadn't sought and couldn't avoid. Wars that required his physical presence on the frontier, far from Rome, far from any comfort, living in military tents for years, not weeks of campaign followed by months of rest. Years living under war conditions, years making decisions that cost human lives, years sending men into battles knowing many wouldn't come back. And every wrong decision meant not just a military defeat, but thousands of families destroyed by his error in judgment. The betrayals, people he'd placed genuine trust in, conspired against him. The most devastating case was Avidius Cassius, one of his most competent and reliable generals, a man Marcus Aurelius had given power and responsibility precisely because he believed in his loyalty. Cassius declared open rebellion against the emperor based on the false rumor that Marcus Aurelius had died. When Marcus Aurelius learned that someone he considered an ally, someone he'd defended and promoted, had tried to take his place by exploiting a moment of vulnerability, the wound wasn't political. It was personal. It was the wound of betrayed trust that any human being feels when someone close reveals that their loyalty was a facade. And the day after learning of the betrayal, Marcus Aurelius kept governing. He didn't lock himself away to process. He didn't take a week to recover emotionally. He didn't let the wound of betrayal paralyze the functioning of the empire. He kept making decisions, kept laying bricks, kept doing the work of a human being on a construction that someone had just tried to blow up from the inside. And when Cassius was killed by his own soldiers, Marcus Aurelius mourned his death instead of celebrating it. Because his purpose didn't include revenge, it included justice, compassion, and the persistence of continuing to be who he'd decided to be, regardless of what others did. And the death of his children. This is the part you need to feel in your bones, not just understand intellectually, because it contains the most powerful proof that it's possible to keep building after the worst devastation imaginable. Marcus Aurelius and his wife Faustina had at least 13 children. Most of them died in childhood or youth. 13 children, most of them died. Think about what it means to bury a child. The most devastating pain a human being can experience. The pain that has no bottom, no consolation, no logic. Now multiply it. Not by 2, by most of 13. Burying child after child after child, while the empire demands you keep functioning, keep deciding, keep being the pillar that millions of people lean on. And every morning, Marcus Aurelius got up, opened his journal, wrote. Not about how unfair everything was, not about the pain he felt, about how to be better, about how to respond with more wisdom, about how to find strength in the principles he'd chosen as the foundation of his life. Every morning, after nights that must have been unbearable, after losses that should have destroyed him, after pressures that should have crushed him, he laid another brick, not a perfect brick, a brick, the one he could lay that day with whatever strength he had left. He wrote himself reminders that reveal how hard it was for him to keep going. They weren't the words of someone who found it easy to get up. They were the words of someone who needed to convince himself every morning that it was worth continuing. At dawn, when you have trouble getting up, remember, I am rising to do the work of a human being. That sentence isn't inspiration, it's survival. It's a man telling himself, in the darkness of a morning he doesn't want to face, that there's a reason to stand up, even though everything inside him wants to stay lying down. And the reason wasn't grandeur. It wasn't, I'm going to change the world. It was simplicity. I'm going to do the work of a human being. I'm going to be just today. I'm going to be disciplined today. I'm going to try to be useful today, not tomorrow. Not when the pain passes, not when the plague ends, not when the wars are over. Today, with this pain, with this loss, with this burden. Today I do the work of a human being because that's what I am and that's what I can control. Now, look at your situation, honestly. Look at it with the perspective that comes from knowing what Marcus Aurelius faced during 19 years of rule without a single real period of rest. Your bad day. That day your mind inflated into a universal catastrophe that justifies abandoning everything you've built. Does it compare, in any measure, in any dimension, to what he lived through? Does your broken exercise or discipline streak compare to burying most of your children? Does your relapse into an old habit of consumption or laziness compare to a pandemic killing millions of your citizens over years? Does your moment of weakness where you said what you shouldn't have or ate what you shouldn't have compare to years of war on a frozen frontier, far from everything you love, surrounded by death and disease? I'm not saying this to minimize your pain or to make you feel like your suffering isn't valid. Your pain is real. Your stumbles are real. Your frustration when you fall deserves to be acknowledged and respected. I'm saying this to give you perspective, to pull you out of the mental bubble where a bad day equals the end of the world, to show you that if Marcus Aurelius, facing what he faced, found a reason to get up every morning and keep laying bricks, you can find a reason to get up after your bad day and keep building. Seneca said that we study the examples of great people not to feel small by comparison, but to remind ourselves that greatness of spirit is attainable, that if they could, with what they faced, we can with ours. Not because we're their equals, because we have access to the same tool they used, the decision to get up one more time than we fall. Your assignment for this lesson is to write your own version of Marcus Aurelius's sentence. The sentence you're going to say to yourself every morning after a bad day. Not a generic motivational quote copied from the internet. A sentence that's yours, that reflects your real situation, that names the concrete reason it's worth it for you to get up. I get up because I'm building something worth more than my comfort. I get up because I fell yesterday, and today I choose not to stay on the ground. I get up because the work of building my life doesn't do itself. Whatever works for you, but make it yours, make it real, and have it ready for the next hard morning, because that morning is coming, and when it comes, you need something stronger than your desire to stay in bed. You need a reason your mind can't argue with. Fourth Stoic lesson. You're looking for motivation to keep going when what you need is discipline to keep going, even when motivation disappears. We already talked about this in the last episode, when we distinguished between motivation and commitment. But we need to go deeper here, because after a bad day, the first thing your mind reaches for to justify staying on the ground is the absence of motivation. I don't feel motivated. I lost the drive. I can't find the energy to keep going. And from that complaint, which sounds legitimate, which sounds like a real problem that needs to be solved before you can continue, you sit there waiting for motivation to come back. As if it were a friend who stepped out to buy something, and any minute now is going to knock on the door with a bag full of renewed enthusiasm. Motivation isn't coming back. At least not the way you expect. It's not coming back as that fire you felt in the first days when everything was new and exciting. That fire was novelty. It was the thrill of the beginning. It was the dopamine hit your brain produces when it starts something different, and like every dopamine hit, it runs out. It's temporary by biological design. It didn't fail. It didn't get lost. It served its purpose, which was to give you the initial push to start. And now, it's gone. What remains after motivation burns out is where the real work begins. And the real work doesn't require motivation. It requires discipline. Motivation is rocket fuel. It launches you into space with impressive force, gives you speed and altitude in a short time, and then it's gone. If you were depending on that fuel for the entire journey, you're lost when it runs out. You're floating in the void without propulsion, waiting for someone on the ground to refuel you. Discipline is nuclear energy. It doesn't have the explosiveness of rocket fuel. It's not exciting. It doesn't feel like an epic launch. But it produces constant, quiet, sustained energy for the entire journey. It doesn't run out. It doesn't depend on your mood. It doesn't need novelty to function. It functions because you switched it on once and decided to keep it on. The transition from motivation to discipline is the most dangerous and most critical moment in any process of personal construction. It's the exact point where most people quit, not where they technically fail, where they emotionally abandon. Not because the project failed or the path turned out to be wrong or the obstacles were insurmountable, simply because the emotion ran out and they didn't have a backup propulsion system to keep moving without it. Think about how many times you've started something with overwhelming enthusiasm. A diet, an exercise program, a personal project, a new habit. The first days are brilliant. Motivation is through the roof. You feel unstoppable. You post on social media about your new beginning. You tell your friends about your transformation. You buy the necessary gear. You sign up for the program. And for a week, maybe two, you're a new person. Until motivation runs out. Until the novelty disappears. Until the early enthusiasm evaporates. And what's left is the daily, repetitive, unglamorous work that generates no dopamine, no applause, no feeling of doing something special. And that's where you quit. Not with a dramatic announcement, with a gradual silence we already described in the first lesson. How many times have you repeated that cycle in your life? How many brilliant beginnings ended in silent abandonments? The pattern is always the same. Intense initial motivation followed by gradual fading, followed by abandonment. And the cause is always the same: dependence on motivation instead of building discipline. It's like a marathon runner stopping at mile 2 because the electrifying adrenaline of the starting line wore off, and waiting to feel that same adrenaline to keep running. The starting line adrenaline doesn't come back at mile 2, or mile 6, or mile 12. What carries you from mile 2 to mile 26 is not adrenaline, it's training. It's system, it's discipline, it's the decision to put one foot in front of the other regardless of what your body and mind are telling you in that moment. Marcus Aurelius was the living embodiment of discipline over motivation. There isn't a single entry in his meditations that says, "Today I felt motivated to govern." Not one. What there are is dozens of entries that say, essentially, "Today I didn't want to get up, and I got up anyway." Motivation was never his fuel. Discipline was. The decision made once and renewed every morning without depending on how he felt. The practice of doing what needed to be done without waiting for his emotions to cooperate with his responsibilities. Seneca built a daily writing system that didn't depend on inspiration. He didn't write when he felt inspired. He wrote every day, period. The days where the words flowed easily, and the days where every sentence was a battle. The days where the subject excited him, and the days where he felt nothing for what he was writing. The consistency of his practice wasn't tied to the quality of his emotional state. It was tied to a decision he'd made and maintained with the same firmness he maintained his breathing. Automatic, non-negotiable, independent of circumstances. Epictetus taught his students with questions that left them no excuses. Do you stop eating when you don't feel an emotional hunger to eat? No. You eat because your body needs fuel. Do you stop breathing when you don't feel motivated to breathe? No. You breathe because it's necessary. So why do you stop doing what feeds your soul and your purpose when you don't feel motivated to do it? Motivation is irrelevant. Necessity is what matters. And if you decided that building your purpose is a necessity, act accordingly without waiting for your emotions to applaud every step. Discipline after a bad day is especially crucial because it's what breaks the escalation cycle we described in the first lesson. Remember, the destruction process goes from bad day to catastrophic interpretation to second bad day to bad week to abandonment. Where does that cycle break? At the transition from the bad day to the second day. And what breaks that transition isn't motivation. It's the discipline of getting on your feet the next day and doing something, anything, even if you feel absolutely nothing. You don't need to feel like laying a brick to lay a brick. The bricklayer doesn't wait to feel passion for cement every morning before going to work. He goes because he decided that's what he does. And when he gets to the site, he lays bricks, wanting to or not, motivated or not, enthusiastic or exhausted. The brick doesn't know whether you laid it motivated or disciplined. The wall doesn't distinguish between bricks laid with passion and bricks laid with sheer will. Both serve the same function. Both hold up the same structure. Both build the same house. There's a discipline practice you need to implement, and it's the most powerful tool against motivation dependency, the non-negotiable minimum. It's the smallest possible version of your daily practice that you can do even on the worst day of your life. If your practice is exercising for an hour, your non-negotiable minimum might be a 5-minute walk. If your practice is writing 1,000 words, your non-negotiable minimum might be writing 1 sentence. If your practice is meditating for 20 minutes, your non-negotiable minimum might be sitting in silence for 60 seconds. The non-negotiable minimum isn't designed to produce impressive results. It's designed to keep the construction chain intact, so that even the worst day has a brick laid. So that you never, under any circumstances, go a day with 0 construction, because 0 is the enemy. 0 is what opens the door to a second day of 0, and the second 0 opens the door to abandonment. Your assignment for this lesson is to define your non-negotiable minimum for each of your purpose-building practices, for your daily discipline, for your weekly service, for your nightly review. The smallest, most ridiculously achievable version you can do, even sick, even exhausted, even emotionally devastated, and commit to that being your floor, the point below which you never fall. The brick that always gets laid, no matter how bad the day was. 5th Stoic lesson. Momentum isn't lost by falling, but by spending too long deciding whether it's worth getting up. Momentum is a force, a real physical force that also operates in your life of personal construction. And like all forces, it has properties you need to understand if you want to keep it working in your favor instead of losing it through ignorance. The most important property of momentum is this: it's much easier to maintain than to recover. Pushing a car that's standing still requires enormous effort. Keeping a car that's already rolling in motion requires minimal effort. Your construction process works the same way. When you've been laying bricks consecutively for days, weeks, months, each new brick costs less effort than the one before. The practice becomes more natural. The discipline becomes more automatic. Internal resistance decreases. Momentum carries you. You're rolling, and every day of building gives you speed for the next. But when you stop, when you quit laying bricks for any reason, momentum dissipates. The speed you'd built with so much effort gradually disappears. And when you finally decide to start again, after days or weeks of inactivity, you have to push the car from 0 all over again, from total inertia, from absolute stillness. From a starting point that feels identical to day one, as if you'd never done anything, as if the weeks of previous work had never existed. And that restart effort is so large, so disproportionately greater than the effort it would have taken to simply maintain the movement with 1 minimum brick per day, that many people look at it and say, "I can't," and stay where they are. Not because they objectively can't, because the perceived cost of restarting feels unbearable compared to the actual cost of having continued, which would have been minimal. It's one of the cruelest ironies of human behavior. We pay an enormous price for stopping when we would have paid a minimal price for continuing. And we pay it not because stopping was necessary, but because we gave ourselves the luxury of deliberating on the ground when we should have been laying the next brick. That's why the fall itself isn't the problem. The fall stops the car momentarily. It's a sudden break, an unexpected obstacle in the road. But if you get up fast, if you shake off the dust and lay a brick the day after the fall, the car still has some residual speed. There's still usable momentum. The restart is incomparably easier when the gap between the fall and the resumption is short. 1 day of pause requires less restart effort. A week of pause requires 10 times more. A month of pause requires an effort that feels equivalent to starting from scratch, as if the previous months of work had never happened. But if you stay on the ground deciding whether it's worth getting up, if you spend days or weeks in that endless deliberation of, should I keep going? Does this make sense? Can I really do this? Momentum dissipates completely. Speed reaches 0. And when you finally decide to get up, if you decide, You have to start from a total inertia that feels like you've never done anything, like the months of previous work don't exist, because in terms of momentum, they don't. Momentum has no memory. It doesn't care how much you built before. It cares how long you've gone without building now. This is why the 24-hour rule from the second lesson is so important. It's not arbitrary. It's designed to protect your momentum. 24 hours is the maximum time you can spend stopped, without the restart cost becoming significantly greater. After 24 hours, each additional day of inactivity doubles the effort needed to start again. Not literally doubles, it feels like it doubles. Internal resistance grows exponentially with each day of inactivity, and that growing resistance is what turns a manageable stumble into permanent abandonment. Marcus Aurelius intuitively understood the principle of momentum, even though he didn't call it that. Every morning, no matter what had happened the day before, he resumed his practices, his writing, his reflection, his duties. He never let a single day pass without laying at least one brick. And that consistency, that absolute refusal to let a single 0 day happen, was what kept his momentum intact through years of adversity that would have destroyed anyone who'd allowed themselves the luxury of stopping a few days to recover. Seneca, in exile, maintained his writing momentum from day one. He didn't give himself a week to adjust. He didn't wait to feel settled in Corsica before starting to write. He started immediately, because he knew, with the intuition of someone who understands how the human mind works, that every day that passed without writing would make it harder to do it again, that the pause would become habit, that the habit would become identity, that he'd go from being a writer who's taking a break to someone who used to write. And that identity transition is irreversible if you don't intervene in time. Epictetus taught this principle with a metaphor his students never forgot, and that you need to burn into your mind: the chain metaphor. Every day you practice your discipline, every day you lay a brick, is a link in a chain. When the chain has 10 consecutive links, breaking it seems unthinkable, because you'd lose the entire chain, all 10 days of accumulated effort. At 20, the idea of breaking it hurts more. At 50, breaking it feels like a crime against yourself. At 100 consecutive links, the chain becomes part of your identity. You're someone who doesn't break the chain. And that identity protects you from bad days better than any motivation ever could. But if you break it, if you let a day pass without adding your link, the chain is over. You start a new chain from zero, from a single link. And a one-link chain doesn't have the same gravitational pull as a 100-link chain. It doesn't hurt to break it. It doesn't feel like a significant loss. Breaking a one-link chain is as easy as never having started one, and that's why the second link in a new chain is easier to lose than the 100th link in a long chain. And that's why the first days after a break are the most dangerous and most vulnerable to total abandonment, because the new chain is too short to generate the positive inertia that protects you. There's something you need to understand about post-fall deliberation. When you're lying on the ground asking yourself whether it's worth getting up, you're not making a rational assessment. You're negotiating with your resistance. Your mind presents arguments that sound logical. Maybe this isn't the right path. Perhaps I need to rethink everything from scratch. I should probably wait for a better time. But those arguments aren't analysis. They're excuses disguised as reflection. They're resistance to effort using the language of prudence to convince you that staying on the ground is the smart move. The smart move is always to get up. Always, without exception. You can rethink your strategy while walking. You can adjust your plan while laying bricks. You can question your direction while moving forward. What you can't do is stop to think for days or weeks, because every day of deliberation on the ground moves you further from the ability to start moving again. Your assignment for this lesson is to identify where you are right now on the momentum scale. If you're in full motion, with consecutive days of construction, protect that chain with everything you've got. Don't break the streak for anything. Lay your non-negotiable minimum even on the worst day. If you've already stopped, if days have already passed without laying a brick, your task is more urgent. Lay a brick today, not tomorrow, today, before this day ends. A minimum brick, whatever it is, but today. Because every additional day of deliberation makes the restart exponentially harder. And the restart begins with a single act: getting on your feet and doing something. Anything. But now, sixth Stoic lesson. Seneca was exiled, lost his fortune, faced the threat of death, and kept writing because he understood that giving up was the only real defeat. In the introduction, I mentioned Seneca's exile briefly. Now I need you to understand the full story, because it contains the most important lesson of this episode about what it really means to give up and why it's the only way to truly lose. In the year 41 AD, Seneca was accused of having an affair with Julia Livilla, Emperor Claudius's niece. The accusation was probably false, a political maneuver by Messalina, Claudius's wife, to eliminate someone she considered a threat. It didn't matter whether it was true or a lie. What mattered was that Seneca was convicted. Overnight, literally, he went from being one of the most influential and respected men in Rome to an exile shipped off to Corsica. Think about what that means in practical terms. One day you're somebody. You have power. You have wealth. You have a network that opens doors. You have ongoing projects. You have a reputation built over decades of intellectual and political work. You have an entire life built with the care and intention we've practiced in this series. And the next day, all of it vanishes. Not gradually, all at once, as if someone took the house you built brick by brick over years and demolished it with a wrecking ball in an afternoon. What Seneca did on Corsica is what separates the people who build something lasting from the people who quit when life destroys what they had. He could have drowned in self-pity. He had every reason to. He could have turned bitter, consumed by resentment against the injustice that put him there. He could have sat down to wait for someone to rescue him or for circumstances to change on their own. He could have said, with every legitimacy in the world, "It's over. There's no point in building anymore. They took everything from me." Instead, he wrote, Consolation to Helvia, a letter to his mother to comfort her about his exile. Think about that. The man who had lost everything found the energy not to comfort himself, but to comfort someone else. He wrote Consolation to Polybius, strategically seeking the favor of a freedman close to Claudius to secure his return. He wrote philosophical reflections that would become part of his legacy. On a remote island, without resources, without an audience, without any guarantee that anyone would ever read what he wrote, he kept laying bricks. Why? What drove him to keep building when everything he'd built before had been destroyed? The answer isn't motivation. It isn't inspiration. It isn't optimism. It's something much deeper and much more resilient. The understanding that giving up was the only real defeat. Seneca understood that as long as he kept building, kept producing, kept being useful to even one person, he wasn't defeated. He was in terrible circumstances, yes. He'd lost almost everything, yes. He was in a place he didn't choose, living a life he didn't want, yes. But he wasn't defeated, because defeat isn't what happens to you. It's what you stop doing after what happens to you. You can lose your job and not be defeated. If the next day you start looking for another one or building something new, you can lose a relationship and not be defeated if you use the pain as fuel to become a better person. You can lose your health and not be defeated if you respond with the dignity of someone who doesn't let circumstances define their spirit. Defeat doesn't come from outside. Defeat is an internal decision. It's the moment you say, "It doesn't matter anymore," and stop laying bricks. That moment, and only that moment, is the real defeat. Seneca spent 8 years on Corsica. 8 years. Not 8 days of photogenic resilience for social media. Not 8 weeks of temporary inspiration before returning to normal. 8 full years of waking up every morning in a place he didn't choose, on an island he hated, with a life he hadn't designed or desired or imagined in his worst nightmares, without knowing if he'd ever return to Rome, without knowing if the exile was temporary or permanent, without knowing if he'd die on that island, forgotten by everyone who once competed for his attention. And each of those roughly 2,900 days, he chose to keep building. 2,900 days of discipline without motivation. 2,900 dawns where the temptation to give up was there, intact, waiting for him with the promise that letting go would be easier than fighting on. 2,900 chances to say, "There's no point anymore." And 2,900 times he chose to say, "Today I lay one more brick." Not because circumstances improved, not because he received signs of hope, not because anyone promised him the effort would be worth it. Because giving up meant giving the injustice that put him there the power to destroy not just his external circumstances, which had already been demolished in one blow, but his inner person, his spirit, his ability to create, his will to be useful, which were the only things he had left and the only things he maintained absolute control over. And when he was finally called back to Rome, when circumstances changed because Agrippina needed a tutor for her son Nero and remembered the exiled philosopher, Seneca didn't arrive empty or destroyed. He arrived with 8 years of intellectual and spiritual work done under the most extreme adversity, with writings produced in pain that would be fundamental to his eternal legacy. With a depth of understanding about human suffering and the resilience of the spirit that can only be acquired by living through them firsthand for years, not by reading about them in the comfort of a library. The exile that should have destroyed him didn't destroy him. It deepened him, tempered him the way fire tempers steel, turned him into someone with more wisdom, more moral authority, and more inner strength than the Seneca who had been ripped from Rome 8 years earlier. That's what happens when you don't give up. It's not that circumstances magically improve, it's that you improve despite the circumstances. And when circumstances eventually change, and they always change because nothing is permanent, you're in a better position than before the fall, not in spite of the fall, because of what you built during the fall. Marcus Aurelius expressed it differently, but the essence was the same. Every adversity overcome strengthens you. Every blow absorbed makes you more resistant. Every day you decide to keep building when everything tells you to stop turns you into someone harder to defeat next time. Adversity doesn't destroy you if you don't give up. It trains you. Epictetus, who lived the most extreme adversities of the three, taught that surrender isn't an event, but a gradual process of disconnection. You don't give up all at once, you give up little by little. You stop trying a bit today, a bit more tomorrow. You lower the intensity 1 week, the next you do a little less, and one day you realize you've gone months without laying a brick and you can't remember what building felt like. That's surrender. The slow erosion of your will to continue until nothing remains. Your assignment for this lesson is to ask yourself a brutal question and answer it with the honesty this series demands. Is there something in your life you silently abandoned? A project you let die without admitting you let it die? A practice you stopped doing while pretending you're just taking a break? A commitment to yourself you broke so softly you didn't even hear the sound of the break? If the answer is yes, and if you're honest, there's probably more than one thing you silently abandoned. Today, you can reverse it. Not by picking everything up at once or making grand promises of total reconstruction that your track record proves you won't keep, by laying a brick. One single brick on that abandoned construction that the weeds of silent abandonment are starting to cover. Not as a dramatic promise that you're going to rebuild everything tomorrow with the strength of a reborn warrior. As a simple, quiet, powerful in its modesty declaration that you haven't given up. That defeat is only real and final when you stop trying. And that today, with this one single brick laid on a project that seemed abandoned forever, you prove you're still in the game, that the building isn't finished, that you aren't finished, that as long as you lay a brick, even just one, the construction is still alive. Seventh Stoic lesson. Your progress is not a straight line going up. It's a staircase with landings, setbacks, and leaps, and all of them are part of the same ascent. There's an image that's destroying your ability to maintain momentum, and we need to destroy it right now. It's the image of progress as a straight ascending line. A perfect diagonal going from the bottom left to the top right, with no deviations, no curves, no setbacks, no moments where the line dips or flattens. A clean, predictable, constant line where every day is better than the last and the advance never stops. That image is a lie that social media feeds by showing you other people's final results without showing you the stumble-filled path they traveled to get there. A lie that motivational gurus reinforce with phrases like "never stop" and "always upward," that sound inspirational but set an impossible expectation and make you feel like a failure when your actual progress doesn't resemble that perfect line. Your actual progress looks like a staircase, not a clean, uniform staircase with same-size steps perfectly spaced. An irregular, unpredictable staircase with steps of different heights and depths. With landings where you stop to catch your breath. With sections where you climb fast and sections where every step costs triple the effort. With moments where you go back a step or two because you lost your balance, or because the step you stood on wasn't as solid as it looked. And with occasional leaps where you jump 3 or 4 steps at once because something clicked and everything seems to advance at the same time. All of those elements, the ascents, the landings, the setbacks, and the leaps, are part of the same process. They're not interruptions of the process. They're not failures in the process. They are the process. And you need to internalize that, because as long as you keep comparing your real progress to the imaginary straight line, every landing is going to feel like stagnation, every setback is going to feel like failure, and every moment you're not actively climbing is going to feel like evidence that something's wrong. Nothing is wrong. You're climbing a staircase that has the shape all real staircases have, irregular, imperfect, with ups and downs that are an integral part of the total ascent. Marcus Aurelius lived a staircase with some of the most brutal setbacks in history. Periods of progress where the empire stabilized and things seemed to improve, followed by devastating setbacks where a new crisis destroyed the gains that had been made. The plague wiped out economic progress. A new war eliminated the peace that had been won. A betrayal destroyed the trust that had been built. And after every setback, Marcus Aurelius didn't say, "The staircase is broken." He said, implicitly in his writings, "This is a hard section of the staircase, and I'm going to climb it, even though it costs more than the last section." Seneca experienced the staircase in the most dramatic way possible. He climbed to the highest levels of power and influence in Rome. Then he dropped 8 steps at once when he was exiled. Then he climbed again when he was called back. Then he started descending again when his relationship with Nero deteriorated. And in every section, in every climb and every descent, he kept building. He didn't wait to be on an ascending section to lay bricks. He laid bricks on the way up and on the way down equally, because he understood that construction doesn't depend on which direction the section is going. It depends on the decision of the builder. Epictetus taught that expecting constant progress is a form of arrogance disguised as ambition. It's believing you deserve a path without obstacles, that the universe should provide you with an escalator going up instead of the irregular staircase everyone else has to climb too, and that when the staircase isn't smooth and perfect, something's wrong. Not with the staircase, with you, because you're not strong or disciplined or deserving enough. That interpretation is absurd, and Epictetus demolished it with a simple observation. Do you know anyone who built something significant without setbacks? Anyone who climbed without ever going down? Anyone whose progress was a constant straight line from start to finish? The answer is no, because that person doesn't exist, has never existed, will never exist. Every significant life has setbacks. Every significant construction has moments where it seems to crumble. Every significant ascent has sections where you go down or stop without advancing. There's something specific and crucial you need to understand about setbacks, because it's the point where your mind deceives you most effectively. Setbacks don't erase previous progress. Going down 2 steps on a 50-step staircase doesn't put you at the beginning. It puts you on step 48. You're still 48 steps above where you started, and those 48 steps are still yours. The setback didn't eliminate them, didn't invalidate them, didn't turn them into an illusion, didn't make the effort you put into climbing them pointless. You're still the person who climbed 48 steps with your own effort, your own discipline, your own will. The fact that you dropped 2 doesn't change that, can't change it, because the steps you climbed are accomplished facts that no setback can erase from your history. But your mind doesn't see it that way. Your mind, with its catastrophizing and generalizing tendency we've known since the first lesson of this episode, sees the 2 steps of setback and screams, "We're back at the start. Everything's lost." It ignores with Olympic indifference the 48 steps of ascent, the weeks of discipline, the bricks laid with consistency, the accumulated victories, and focuses with a sickening obsession exclusively on the 2 steps of descent. It tells you with full conviction, "See, you're falling, you're failing. It was all an illusion," when the objective reality, the reality you'd see if you could view your staircase from outside, the way someone who doesn't live inside your catastrophic head sees it, is that you're on step 48 of a staircase you hadn't climbed even the first step of 11 episodes ago. You're incomparably higher than where you started. And 2 steps of setback in an ascent of 48 isn't a fall. It's an adjustment, a moment of recalibration in an ascent that remains an ascent. You need to learn to see the whole staircase instead of focusing on the step you're on right now. You need to zoom out. Perspective, the ability to look back and see how far you've climbed instead of looking down and seeing the 2 steps you lost. Because when you see the whole staircase, when you compare where you are today with where you were in episode 1, when you accepted that you were lost, the progress is undeniable, massive, real, and no temporary setback can erase it, no matter how much your mind insists it has. The landings are part of the staircase too, and you need to stop fearing them. A landing isn't stagnation, it's consolidation. It's the moment where your body and mind integrate what you've learned and gained in the previous section. It's the moment where the freshly laid bricks dry and solidify before you lay the next ones on top. If you don't allow landings, if you demand constant progress without pause, the bricks don't dry, the structure weakens, and one day you collapse, not from lack of discipline, but from lack of wisdom to know when to advance and when to consolidate. The difference between a healthy landing and silent abandonment is intention and duration. A healthy landing is deliberate, brief, and maintains the non-negotiable minimum. You know you're resting. You know when you're going to resume full intensity, and while you rest, you keep laying your minimum daily brick to keep the chain intact. Silent abandonment has no end date, no intention of resuming, and lays no bricks. Your assignment for this lesson is to zoom out on your life and see the full staircase. Write down where you were when you started this series, what you were thinking, what you were feeling, what you were doing or failing to do. And then write where you are today, what you've changed, what you've built, what tools you have now that you didn't have then. The difference between those 2 points is your staircase, with all its steps, its landings, its setbacks, and its leaps. And that staircase is yours. You climbed it. And no stumble, no bad day, no temporary setback can take away the steps you've already climbed. 8th Stoic lesson. Every time you recover from a fall, you become harder to defeat, because you learn that you can survive what you thought would destroy you. There's something that happens inside you every time you get up after a fall that's more valuable than any streak of perfect days. Something you can't get any other way. Something the good days, no matter how many there are, can't give you. And that something is the empirical evidence, verified by your own experience, not by a book or a podcast or a mentor's words, that you can survive what you thought would destroy you. Before your first fall and recovery, the fear of stumbling is theoretical. You're afraid to fall because you imagine falling will be catastrophic, that the fall will destroy you, that you won't be able to get up, that the pain will be unbearable, that the damage will be irreparable. That entire catastrophic narrative lives in your imagination and has enormous power over you, precisely because you've never put it to the test. You've never checked whether the catastrophe you imagine is real or whether it's a fiction your fear built to keep you paralyzed. But when you fall and get up, when you stumble and keep walking, when you fail and lay a brick the next day, something changes inside you permanently. The catastrophic narrative loses power, because now you have data, real data from your own life that contradicts the horror story your mind had fabricated. You fell, and it didn't destroy you. You stumbled, and it wasn't the end. You failed, and the next day you were still alive, still capable, still had the option of laying another brick. The imagined catastrophe turned out to be a temporary discomfort, and that lesson, learned firsthand, is irreplaceable. The second time you fall, the fear is smaller. Not because the fall hurts less, because you already know you survived the first one. Your mind tries the same catastrophic narrative. This is terrible. It's all over. You won't be able to get up. But now you have a counter-argument you didn't have before. Last time I also thought it was the end, and I got up. Why would this time be different? The third time, the fear is even smaller. The fourth, smaller still. And at some point, after enough falls and recoveries, the fear of stumbling loses its paralyzing power. It doesn't disappear completely. There's always a discomfort in falling. But it stops being an existential threat, stops being something that paralyzes you and keeps you on the ground. It becomes what it always was, an uncomfortable moment within a long process that includes uncomfortable moments as part of its structure. That's what it means to become harder to defeat. It's not that falls stop happening. They're going to keep happening your whole life. It's not that pain magically disappears. You're going to keep feeling the impact every time you stumble. It's not that adversity softens and turns friendly. Adversity is adversity, and it's going to stay that way. What changes is you. The falls stop having the power to stop you because you've already proven, with real evidence from your own experience, that you can get up from them. You develop the ability to function with pain instead of needing pain to disappear before you can function. The adversity that used to seem like an insurmountable mountain you now see as another step on a staircase you've already climbed dozens of times. Not easier, more familiar, and the familiar doesn't paralyze. The unknown does. Marcus Aurelius became harder to defeat with every crisis he weathered during his 19 years of rule. The first crisis of his reign probably hit him with a force that made him question everything. But the 20th crisis, even if it was objectively worse than the first, found him better prepared. Not because he'd learned to avoid crises, because he'd learned he could survive them. That they didn't destroy him. That on the other side of every crisis he was still standing, still functioning, still capable of laying bricks. And that accumulation of survival evidence became an inner fortress that no new crisis could penetrate. Seneca described this process as the hardening of the spirit through adversity, not hardening as numbness, but as resilience, like steel that hardens when subjected to fire and the strike of the hammer. Not because fire and the hammer are pleasant, but because the process of enduring and surviving them produces a material stronger than the original. A person who has fallen and gotten up multiple times has a spirit tempered by experience that a person who has never fallen simply cannot have. Seneca lived this in his own flesh in an extraordinary way. Every blow life dealt him, and there were many, and they were devastating, found him more prepared than the one before. The exile was brutal, but the experience of surviving it gave him a strength he used when he faced the final collapse of his relationship with Nero. It didn't take away the pain. It gave him the certainty that he could endure the pain and keep being who he'd decided to be. Epictetus taught that obstacles are the gym of the spirit, and like any gym, resistance is built progressively. You don't start by lifting the heaviest weight. You start with small weights that grow as your capacity increases. Today's small stumbles prepare you for tomorrow's big obstacles. The fall that seems devastating to you today is training you to face future falls that would be genuinely devastating if they found you without prior training. Every recovery is training, not punishment, not failure. Training that makes you stronger for what's coming. And what's coming always includes more obstacles, more stumbles, more falls. But you face them with the accumulated total of every previous recovery, with the empirical evidence that you survived what you thought would destroy you, with the certainty, earned through bruises, that you can fall and get back up. That the fall isn't the end, but one more part of the training that turns you into someone who eventually becomes very, very hard to defeat. There's something the most resilient people in the world, the ones who build significant things despite the blows, who fall and get up with a consistency that seems superhuman, have in common that people who quit easily don't have. An internal archive of recoveries, a mental catalogue of every time they fell and got back up. An inventory of personal, non-transferable evidence that says, I can handle this, backed, not by empty optimism or motivational quotes copied from the internet, but by concrete, verifiable, real facts from their own life story. When they face a new obstacle, they access that archive and find proof that similar obstacles have already been overcome. And that proof gives them the strength to face the new obstacle with the confidence of someone who has already demonstrated they can. You're building that archive right now. Every fall you recover from during this construction process is an entry in your resilience archive. Every bad day you don't turn into a bad week is evidence you can use the next time you fall. Every stumble you don't convert into abandonment is a recovery muscle that strengthens for the next stumble. Your assignment for this lesson is to create your archive of recoveries. I want you to write down 3 moments in your life where you fell and got back up. They don't need to be dramatic falls. They can be moments where something went wrong, and you, instead of giving up, found a way to keep going. Moments where you faced something you thought would destroy you and discovered it didn't. Write down what happened, what you felt at the moment of the fall, what you did to get up, and what you learned from the experience. That document is your resilience archive, your empirical evidence that you can survive what scares you. And the next time you fall, before you let your mind convince you that this time is different, that this time it really is the end, open your archive and remember, you've survived before. You can survive again. The evidence is there, written in your own hand, waiting to remind you who you really are when your mind tries to convince you you're someone who can't get up. 9th Stoic lesson. Epictetus walked with a leg destroyed by his former master and taught that obstacles don't block the path, but are the path. Of the 3 great Stoic minds, Epictetus is the one who lived this lesson most literally. Not as metaphor, not as an abstract philosophical idea. In his own body, every day, every step he took. The story told about his leg varies depending on the source. Some say his master broke his leg deliberately as punishment. Others say his master twisted his leg until it broke, while Epictetus calmly warned him, "You're going to break it." And when the leg broke, he simply said, "I told you you'd break it," without screaming, without crying, without hatred, with the serenity of someone who understood that what the master did was outside his control, but that his response to the pain was entirely within his power. That leg never healed properly. Epictetus walked with a permanent limp for the rest of his life. Every step he took was a physical reminder of the abuse he'd suffered. Every movement cost him more effort than a person with 2 healthy legs. Every day started with a disadvantage he hadn't chosen, hadn't caused, and couldn't eliminate. And every day, with that broken leg, he walked to his school and taught, not about how to overcome obstacles, about how to use obstacles as the very material of growth, about how to turn what holds you back into the reason you move forward, the way you move forward. This is the most powerful idea the Stoics left us, and the one you need most right now as you're learning to maintain momentum in the face of adversity. The obstacle is not in your way. The obstacle is your way. Your bad day isn't an interruption of your building process. It's part of your building process. Your stumble isn't a detour from the path you chose. It is the path. Your relapse into an old habit isn't a sign that you failed. It's an information brick that tells you exactly where your weak points are and gives you the opportunity to strengthen them. When Epictetus taught with his broken leg, he didn't teach in spite of his broken leg. He taught because of his broken leg. Because that leg had given him an understanding of suffering, of injustice, of the human capacity to keep functioning with limitations that no book could have given him. The broken leg was his most powerful credential, not an obstacle to overcome, but the very source of his authority to speak about what he spoke about. Your obstacles work exactly the same way, even though your mind insists on seeing them as proof of your failure instead of sources of your strength. Your history of failures, stumbles, relapses, bad days, broken promises to yourself is not a shameful burden you carry that prevents you from moving forward. It's your experience resume. It's the catalog of lessons you paid for with pain that you can now use as construction tools. Every time you failed and found a way to get up, you learned something about yourself that people who never failed simply don't know and can't know. because the knowledge that comes from lived failure can't be acquired any other way. Every time you stumbled, you discovered a blind spot in your armor that you can now reinforce because you saw it. Every time you relapsed into an old pattern, you identified a trigger, a weakness, an automatic mechanism that you can now consciously interrupt because the relapse showed it to you with a clarity that theoretical reflection never would have given you. Those failures don't weaken you if you use them correctly. They inform you. They give you data you didn't have before the fall. They show you exactly where to focus your construction work so the structure is more solid next time. An engineer who studies the points where a bridge weakened builds a stronger bridge. You can do exactly the same with the cracks your stumbles revealed in your personal construction process. Marcus Aurelius expressed this idea when he wrote that the impediment to action can become the fuel for action, that what stands in the way becomes the way. A war he didn't want to fight became the circumstance where he wrote one of the most profound works in history. A plague he couldn't stop became the context where he exercised his highest virtues. The death of his children, the most devastating pain imaginable, became the crucible where his philosophy stopped being theory and became living practice. Every obstacle that should have stopped him became the terrain where he grew the most. Seneca lived it in exile. The exile that should have been the end of his intellectual career became the laboratory where he produced some of his most profound works. The loss of everything he had became the circumstance that gave him the perspective necessary to write about what truly matters when everything superficial has been stripped away. The obstacle didn't stop him. It became his path toward a depth he never would have reached from the comfort of Rome. There's a practical application of this idea you need to implement right now in your construction process. Every time you stumble, instead of interpreting the stumble as a sign of failure, interpret it as information. Ask yourself 3 questions that transform the obstacle from enemy into teacher. First, what did this fall show me about my weak points that I couldn't see before falling? Every stumble reveals a vulnerability you hadn't seen or had dangerously underestimated. The relapse into an old habit shows you the trigger that caused it is still active, still functioning, still has access to your automatic behaviors, and that you need a specific, concrete plan to handle it the next time it shows up. The break in your streak shows you under what exact conditions your discipline wavers, at what time of day, in what emotional state, under what circumstances, and what you need to change in your environment or your routine to protect it better next time. Second, what can I do differently, concretely, the next time I face this same obstacle? It's not about avoiding the obstacle because you can't avoid it. It's about responding differently when it shows up again, because it's going to show up again. The same triggers, the same weaknesses, the same temptations are going to present themselves over and over. And each time they give you an opportunity to respond with more skill than the time before. Third, how does this stumble make me stronger? Not as empty consolation like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, as a real assessment of what new capability you have now that you didn't have before the fall. Maybe now you know your trigger. Maybe now you know what time of day is your most vulnerable moment. Maybe now you understand you need a support system you previously didn't think you needed. That information is real strength you didn't have before the stumble. Epictetus wouldn't have chosen to have his leg broken. Marcus Aurelius wouldn't have chosen the plague or the wars or the death of his children. Seneca wouldn't have chosen exile. But all 3 took what they didn't choose and turned it into the material with which they built something extraordinary, not in spite of the obstacles, but through them, using the obstacles as the path itself. Your assignment for this lesson is to take your most recent stumble, the one that has you on the ground or that still hurts when you remember it, and answer the 3 questions, not to console yourself, to extract from that stumble all the information and all the strength it contains, to turn what your mind interprets as a defeat into what it really is, a brick of wisdom you can use to build something more solid than what you had before the fall. The obstacle is not in your way. The obstacle is your way. And every step you take with your own broken leg, with your own limitations, with your own failures as traveling companions, is a step that brings you closer to the person you can only become by walking through exactly the difficulties you're walking through. There is no shortcut. There is no path without obstacles. There is the path with obstacles that you turn into steps. Or there is the immobility of someone who sat down to wait for a smooth path that doesn't exist. 10th Stoic lesson. Today, you can choose to see your last failure as the ending or as the training that prepared you for what's next. The difference is only in your mind. Everything we've worked on in this episode comes down to this, to a choice, to a decision you make every time you stumble, every time you fall, every time life hits you and leaves you on the ground wondering whether it's worth getting up. The choice is simple, but its consequences are absolute. Is what happened to me the ending, or is it training? If you choose to see it as the ending, everything stops. The construction gets abandoned like a half-finished building nobody comes back to. The bricks you laid with so much effort over weeks and months stay where they are, exposed to the elements, beginning to deteriorate from disuse. The purpose you were building gets filed in the drawer of things you tried that didn't work, alongside the abandoned diets, the unfinished projects, and the broken promises. The new person you were building with so much intention freezes in the incomplete version it was when you decided it was the ending, like a sculpture abandoned midway through that will never reveal the shape it was meant to have. And you go back to being who you were before you started. The you from episode 1. The one who was lost and knew it but didn't do anything about it. The one who had no direction, no tools, no courage to confront their own mediocrity. The one who lived on autopilot, waiting for something to change without doing anything to make the change happen. All the work from 11 episodes, every lesson, every assignment, every painful confrontation with yourself is lost. Not because it was destroyed by the stumble, but because you chose to interpret the stumble as destruction when it wasn't. If you choose to see it as training, everything continues. Everything. The stumble becomes valuable information about your weak points. The fall becomes a new entry in your resilience archive that strengthens your evidence that you can survive what scares you. The pain becomes high-grade fuel for a stronger, better informed, more resilient version of yourself. And you get up. Not because getting up is easy, not because it doesn't hurt, not because you've stopped feeling the temptation to stay on the ground. You get up because you decided, with the prohairesis Epictetus taught you to protect in episode 9, that this stumble doesn't have the power to determine the direction of your life. That your direction is decided by you through your actions, not by a bad day with its temporary emotional impact. The difference between those two interpretations isn't in external reality. The event is the same. The stumble is the same. The pain is the same. The difference is exclusively in your mind, in the meaning you assign to what happened. And that meaning is a choice, not an automatic reflex you can't control. A choice you actively make every time something goes wrong. The Stoics understood this with a clarity that modern psychology took centuries to rediscover. It's not events that affect us, but our interpretation of events. The same rain that ruins the tourist's picnic waters the farmer's field. The same layoff that destroys one person frees another to start something they'd been putting off for years. The same illness that embitters one person awakens another to what truly matters. The event is neutral. The interpretation gives it meaning, and the interpretation is yours. Epictetus expressed it with the most quoted sentence in Stoicism. It is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things. Your last failure doesn't disturb you. Your judgment that the failure means, I'm a failure, or I can't, or it's all over, is what disturbs you. And that judgment isn't a fact. It's a story your mind constructed around a fact. And stories can be rewritten. You can take the same fact, the same stumble, the same bad day, and write a completely different story. Instead of, I failed because I'm weak, you can write, I failed because I found a weakness I can now strengthen. Instead of, it's all over, you can write, one day is over, and tomorrow begins another. Instead of, I can't do this, you can write, today I couldn't, and tomorrow I'm going to try differently. The story you write about your failure is the story that's going to determine what you do next. If you write an ending story, you stay on the ground. If you write a training story, you get up. That simple. That powerful. Marcus Aurelius rewrote his stories every night in his meditations. When something went wrong, he didn't write the victim's story or the defeated man's story. He wrote the student's story. This happened. This is what I can learn from it. This is what I'll do differently tomorrow. Every entry was an active exercise in reinterpretation, taking a painful event and turning it into construction material through the story he chose to tell himself about that event. Seneca did the same in his letters. When he described his adversities to Lucilius, he didn't describe them as misfortunes that had destroyed him. He described them as experiences that had deepened him. Not because he was a naive optimist who saw everything through rose-colored glasses, because he consciously chose the interpretation that moved him forward instead of the interpretation that kept him on the ground. It was a deliberate choice, repeated every time life dealt him a new blow. Epictetus took this to the most direct practice. Before reacting to any event, he paused to examine his judgment about the event. Is this as terrible as my first reaction suggests? Or is my reaction disproportionate to the actual event? What story am I building about this, and is it the most useful story I can tell? Those questions, asked in the moment of impact, allowed him to choose his interpretation instead of being swept away by the automatic interpretation his catastrophizing mind tried to impose. You can do the same thing, right now, with your last failure, with your last bad day, with your last stumble that still weighs on your mind, and that your internal narrative has turned into evidence that you can't, that you're worthless, that it was all a waste of time. You can rewrite that story, not by changing the facts. The facts are the facts, and you can't alter them. By changing the meaning you give them, changing the conclusion you draw, changing the narrative from, this proves I'm a failure, to, this proves I still have work to do, and I have the honesty to recognize it. There's a sentence I want you to take from this episode as a permanent tool for every future stumble, a sentence that captures everything we've worked on across 10 lessons of momentum, and that you can use every time your mind tries to turn a bad day into a definitive ending. This is not the end. This is part of the training. 10 words. That's all you need to reinterpret any failure, to change the story from defeat to growth, to choose getting up instead of staying on the ground. Your final assignment for this episode integrates everything we've worked on. I want you to take your last stumble, the most recent one, the one that still weighs on you, and do the following. First, write the story your mind has been telling you about that stumble, unedited, uncensored. The complete story with all the drama and catastrophe your mind has given it. I failed again. I can't stick with anything. It's always the same. I don't have what it takes. Second, read that story out loud. Listen to it. Feel how exaggerated it sounds when you pull it out of your head and put it in the air where it can be examined with distance. Third, rewrite it. The same situation, the same facts, but with a training narrative instead of an ending narrative. I had a bad day, one day, not a bad life, one day. And that day showed me that my weak point is whatever it is, and that tomorrow I can approach it differently. I'm not a failure. I'm a builder who found a crack in his structure and who now has the information to fix it. Fourth, close the journal. Lay your non-negotiable minimum today, and tomorrow start as if it were the first day of a new chain, because it is. And this chain, built with the wisdom of all the previous chains that broke, is going to be stronger than any that came before. Not because you're different, because you now know things you didn't know before. Because every previous fall taught you something this new chain is going to use as its foundation. We've reached the end of episode 11, and what we've done today is arm you against the quietest and most lethal enemy of everything you've built in this series, the temptation to give up when things get hard. I didn't give you motivation. Motivation runs out. I gave you tools. Tools last. Let's walk through what we covered today. In the introduction, you understood that the bad day is inevitable, and that what matters isn't the bad day itself, but what you do after. That Marcus Aurelius faced plague, war, and the death of his children, and got up every morning. That Seneca was exiled for 8 years and kept writing. That Epictetus walked his whole life with a destroyed leg, and taught that obstacles are the path. In the first Stoic lesson, you learned the exact mechanics of how progress gets destroyed. 5 steps that go from the bad day to catastrophic interpretation, to the second bad day, to the bad week, to silent abandonment. And that the destruction always starts in the interpretation, not the event. You created your bad day protocol. Acknowledge without generalizing, lay a minimum brick, and start clean the next day. In the second Stoic lesson, you understood that stumbling is mandatory for anyone who moves, and that staying on the ground is a choice you renew every minute. That the culture of infinite processing is an elegant trap for inaction. That the inertia of the ground grows with every day you spend there. And you adopted the 24-hour rule, maximum 1 day on the ground before laying at least 1 brick. In the third Stoic lesson, Marcus Aurelius showed you the magnitude of what he faced: the Antonine Plague, endless wars, the betrayal of Avidius Cassius, the death of most of his children. And every morning he told himself, "Get up, the work of a human being is waiting, not inspiration, survival." You wrote your own get-up sentence for the hard mornings. In the fourth Stoic lesson, you destroyed the dependency on motivation. You understood that motivation is rocket fuel that burns out fast, while discipline is nuclear energy that sustains the entire journey. That the transition from motivation to discipline is where most people quit, and you defined your non-negotiable minimum, the smallest version of your practice you can do even on the worst day of your life. In the fifth Stoic lesson, you learned that momentum is easier to maintain than to recover. That every day of inactivity doubles the restart effort. That the 24-hour rule protects your residual speed. And that post-fall deliberation is negotiation with resistance disguised as prudence. The smart move is always to get up. In the sixth Stoic lesson, Seneca taught you from his 8 years of exile that giving up is the only real defeat. That, as long as you keep laying bricks, regardless of circumstances, you're not defeated. That the exile that should have destroyed him deepened, and tempered him. And you identified something you silently abandoned and laid a brick on it today. In the 7th Stoic lesson, you replaced the false image of progress as a straight line with the real image of an irregular staircase. You understood that landings, setbacks, and leaps are all part of the same ascent. That going down 2 steps out of 50 doesn't put you at the start, but at 48. And you zoomed out to see everything you've climbed since episode 1. In the 8th Stoic lesson, you discovered that every recovery strengthens you because it gives you empirical evidence that you can survive what you thought would destroy you. That the fear of stumbling loses power with every stumble overcome. And you created your resilience archive with 3 moments where you fell and got back up. In the 9th Stoic lesson, Epictetus showed you with his destroyed leg that obstacles don't block the path, but are the path. That your failures are your experience, resume. And you learned to extract information and strength from every stumble with 3 questions. What did it show me? What do I do differently? How does it make me stronger? And in the 10th Stoic lesson, you understood that the difference between seeing a failure as the ending or as training lies exclusively in your mind. That events are neutral and the interpretation is yours. You rewrote the story of your last stumble from a catastrophic narrative to a growth narrative, and you take with you the sentence that captures it all. This is not the end. This is part of the training. If this episode gave you the tools to get up from any fall, drop this in the comments. The phrase we set at the beginning, "One day does not define me." Share this episode with someone who quit something because a bad day made them believe everything was lost. Someone who's on the ground right now, deciding whether it's worth getting up. Someone who needs to hear that their stumble didn't destroy anything, and that the only moment everything is truly lost is the moment they stop trying. And the next time you fall, because you will fall, remember, a bad day doesn't destroy months of work. What destroys months of work is turning a bad day into a bad week, and a bad week into a silent abandonment. Break the cycle at the first link, get up within the first 24 hours, lay your non-negotiable minimum, and keep walking. Now, I need to prepare you for what's coming, because what's coming is the end of this series, the final episode. The episode that closes the circle of everything you've built since you accepted you were lost in the first chapter of this journey. Think about who you were when you started listening to this series. Think about what you felt, what you believed about yourself, the lies you told yourself, the weight you were carrying, the old identity that had you trapped, the inaction that dominated your life, the emotions that controlled you, the inability to be alone, the lack of boundaries that let anyone walk into your life without permission, the absence of purpose that made you feel like you existed for no reason, the fragility in the face of stumbles that made you quit every time something went wrong. Now think about who you are today. After 11 episodes of deep work, of confrontation with truths you preferred not to see, of deliberate construction of a person who didn't exist when you started listening. You're not the same person. You can't be. It's impossible. Something changed inside you during these 11 episodes. Something was built where there used to be emptiness. Something was born in you that didn't exist before this series, and that now, even though it's still fragile, even though it still needs protection and consistency, is there, real, yours, built with your own hands. Episode 12 is called "The Person You Will Be Is Waiting for Who You Are Today to Die," and it's the episode of rebirth, the final episode of this series, the episode where everything converges, where we consolidate every tool, every lesson, every confrontation, every brick from the 11 previous episodes into something complete, where the new person who's been forming brick by brick, decision by decision, stumble by stumble, and recovery by recovery over 11 episodes, finally looks in the mirror and recognizes themselves as who they were always meant to be, where the transformation stops being a process in progress and becomes a consolidated identity, where I'm changing transforms into I have changed. But for that new person to be fully born, something has to die. The last remnants of who you were before, the last resistances of the old self still trying to come back, the last chains tying you to the version of yourself that no longer serves you and that you no longer are. It's not an ending, it's the most important beginning of your life. The beginning of the existence you built with your own hands across 12 episodes of work that the vast majority of people don't have the courage or the discipline to do. This is Stoicism for winners. This is from lost to unstoppable. Today you learn that falling isn't staying down. That momentum is protected by getting up fast. That discipline sustains what motivation can only start. That obstacles are the path and not its interruption. Tomorrow you're going to learn that getting up for the last time from the ashes of who you were turns you into someone who can no longer be defeated because they've already stopped being the person who could be. See you in episode 12, the final episode, the one that closes the circle, the one that seals the transformation, the one that turns everything you built over 11 episodes into the permanent identity of the person you're going to be for the rest of your life. Your voice matters here more than you think. Every insight you share strengthens and elevates this community because this isn't just another space. It's a circle of people who choose to live with intention, with discipline, and with character. Each of you leaves a mark, and the reflection that receives the most support will be pinned as a banner of who we are. Not as decoration, but as a reminder of the kind of warrior who chooses to think, feel, and act with stoic clarity. Because this is a community that doesn't run from pain, it walks through it with courage. A community that doesn't look for cheap comfort, it seeks wisdom. A community that doesn't break under adversity, it turns it into strength. And if you've made it this far, it's because something inside you is already shifting. Something is waking up. Something is asking for more. So, before you leave, check the description. There you'll find the paths we created to help you keep strengthening your mind. They're not there by accident. Each one exists to help you go deeper, build inner resilience, and return again and again to that place within you where nothing and no one can take your peace. Subscribing isn't doing the podcast a favor. It's an act of respect toward yourself. It's choosing not to live on autopilot anymore. It's committing to think differently, to feel with more order, to live with more intention. Because every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we publish reflections designed to stay with you when life gets heavy, when your mind gets loud, when you need a reminder of who you are. Not following us means risking missing the one lesson you might need in the hardest moment. And if you choose to go a step further, if you choose to become a member, understand one thing clearly. You're not donating, you're sustaining a mission. Because of you, this flame stays alive. Because of you, we can keep spreading Stoicism as a refuge for millions who are fighting not to give up. Your support is what keeps this podcast alive, strong, and growing. You're not a spectator, you're part of the foundation holding this community together. I'll see you in our next Stoicism for Winners session, where we'll keep exploring the depth of Stoic wisdom applied to everyday life. In the meantime, dive into the recommended sessions in the description and continue your path. And until we cross paths again, don't forget this. You are the master of your perception, the guardian of your peace, and the warrior of your own battle. That is the legacy of Stoicism. That is the art of becoming invincible.